Hukbalahap Rebellion. Hukbalahap Rebellion or Hukbong Bayan laban sa mga Hapon is anti-Japanese guerrilla movement formed by the peasant farmers of Central Luzon. They are popularly known simply as Huks. They staged a rebellion against the Philippine government in 1946. Hukbalahap Rebellion is founded by Luis Taruk. The Hukbalahap movement has deep roots in the Spanish encomienda, a system of grants to reward soldiers who had conquered New Spain, established about 1570. This developed into a system of exploitation. In the 19th century, Filipino landlordism under the Spanish colonization arose, and with it, further abuses. Only after the coming of the Americans were reforms initiated to lessen tensions between tenants and landlords. The reforms, however, did not solve the problems, and with growing political consciousness produced by education, peasants began to unite under educated but poor leaders. The most potent of these organizations was the Hukbalahap, which began as a resistance organization against the Japanese but ended as an anti-government resistance movement. During World War II, after the Japanese invasion, peasant leaders met on March 29, 1942 in a forest clearing located in Sitio Bawit, Barrio San Julian, Cabiao, Nueva Ecija, at the junction of Tarlac, Pampanga, and Nueva Ecija provinces to form a united organization. Hukbong Bayan Laban sa mga Hapon was chosen as the name of the organization. After the meeting, a military committee was formed with Luis Taruk as the chairman, Castro Alejandrino as the second in command, Bernardo Poblete as the banal, and Felipa Colala Dayang-Dayang, an Amazon whose unit had killed several Japanese soldiers as members. The strength of the Huk organization came from the mostly agrarian peasants of Central Luzon. Between March 1942 and August 1948, the Huks became a trained and experienced force, well-equipped and well-prepared for its guerrilla warfare. The initial force of 500 armed Huks, which was organized into 5 squadrons, had increased to a fully armed guerrilla force of 20,000 men. The group leaders, among them figurehead Luis Taro, Communist Party Secretary General Jesus Lava, and Commander Hizon Benjamin Cunanan, aimed to lead the Philippines toward Marxist ideals and communist revolution. The Hukbalahap insurrection 1946 to 1954 was their attempt to take over the Philippines. The Hukbalahap's methods were often portrayed by other guerrilla leaders as terrorists. For example, Ray Sihant, an American who led his own band of 3,000 guerrillas, said of the Hukbalahap that the Hukbalahap claimed that it extended its guerrilla warfare campaign for over a decade, merely in search of recognition as World War II freedom fighters and former American and Filipino allies who deserve a share of war reparations. After its inception, the group grew quickly, and by late summer 1943 claimed to have 15,000 to 20,000 active men and women military fighters and 50,000 more in reserve. These fighters' weaponry was obtained primarily by stealing it from battlefields and downed planes left behind by the Japanese, Filipinos, and Americans. They fought Japanese troops to rid the country of its imperialist occupation, worked to subvert the Japanese tax collection service, intercepted food and supplies to the Japanese troops, and created a training school where they taught political theory and military tactics based on Marxist ideas. In areas that the group controlled, they set up local governments and instituted land reforms, dividing up the largest states equally among the peasants and often killing the landlords.
Chairman of the Philippine Red Cross and widow of the Philippines' second President Manuel L. Quezon, as she was en route to her hometown for the dedication of the Quezon Memorial Hospital. Several others were also killed, including her eldest daughter and son-in-law. This attack brought worldwide condemnation of the Hukbalahaps, who claimed that the attacks was done by renegade members. The continuing condemnation and new post-war causes of the movements prompted the Huk leaders to adopt a new name, the Hukbong Magpalaya ng Bayan, or the People's Liberation Army in 1950. Public sympathies for the movement has been waning to their post-war attacks. The Hawk carried out a campaign of raids, hold-ups, robberies, ambushes, murder, rape, massacre of small villages, kidnapping, and intimidation. The Hawks confiscated funds and property to sustain their movements and relied on small village organizers for political and material support. The Hawk movement was mainly spread in the central provinces of Nueva Ecija, Pampanga, Tarlac, Bulacan, and Nueva Vizcaya, Pangasinan, Laguna, Bataan, and Quezon. 1952. Hukbalahap was finally put down through a series of reforms and military victories by Filipino President Ramon Magsaysay. By 1952, within the successful government programs, the Huk movement had lost the impetus to attain their ultimate goal of establishing a people's democracy in the Philippines. The revitalization of the armed force and the failure of the HMB in August of 1950 to exploit their tactical and psychological advantages contributed to the victory of government. Several reasons brought the decline of the Huk power and prestige. The rebels became tired and exhausted of the fighting due to the continuous military operation which kept them on the move to elude capture. The peoples who sympathized with their cause did not have time to farm their crops, which had made difficult for them to contribute to the revolution. As the villagers became hesitant to give food and aid, the Hooks began rather to steal from the peasants and sometimes with the use of force. The effective utilization of reforms and promises improved the image of the government and provided hopes for the insurgents. The 1951 elections were relatively peaceful and honest, with the AFP deputized to safeguard and sanity of the ballot. The Hooks were also deprived of the opportunity to attend to their political operations because of the relentless pursuit by government troops. This further eroded their support in the barrios, caused several insurgents to return to their families, and the others to take advantage of the amnesty program.
What did the government do? It required two major changes to the post-war status quo for the Philippines government to defeat the Hawks. First, the United States had to recognize the severity of the insurgency and provide appropriate amounts of advice and military and economics assistance to help counter it. Luckily, this American advice was sound and well received by an enlightened Filipino leader, Magsaysay. Second, a government victory required an administration in Manila that was more concerned with improving the quality of life for its citizens than with self-enrichment. Ramon Magsaysay provided the latter when he accepted the position for Secretary of National Defense and later won the office of President. Hukbalahap still exists but with a different name. It became New People's Army or Bagong Hukbong Bayan. It was formed and founded by Bernabe Buscaino, also known as Commander Dante, on March 29, 1969. The Moist NPA conducts its armed guerrilla struggle based on the strategical line of protracted people's war. The NPA collects revolutionary taxes in areas where it operates mostly from businesses. This includes mining and logging operations, especially foreign-owned enterprises that provides employment to the people with the belief that crippling the country's economy would give favor for a revolution to occur. The NPA aims to overthrow the Philippine regime in favor of a communist state.
The Second Philippine Republic was established during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. At the outset of the occupation, the Japanese government established a military administration over the Philippines, as well as the Philippine Executive Commission, composed of several pre-war Filipino political leaders. The Kalibapi, Kapisanan ng Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas, was also organized, designed to be the sole and exclusive political organization in the Philippines. On September 20, 1943, the Kalibapi, under the leadership of its Director General Benigno Aquino Sr., held a party convention to elect 54 members of the National Assembly. The assembly was actually made up of 108 members, but half of this number was composed of incumbent governors, and city mayor Jose P. Laurel was elected as president of the Second Republic. The First Republic was Aguinaldo Malolos Republic, and both Benigno Aquino Sr. and Ramon Abancena as a vice presidents. The Second Republic was inaugurated on October 14, 1943, on the front steps of the Legislative Building in Manila. The Philippine flag was hoisted as the national anthem was played. Meanwhile, the Japanese started using propaganda to gain the trust and confidence of Filipinos who refused to cooperate with them. They hung gained posters and distributed their materials that contained such slogans as "The Philippines belong to the Filipinos." They also used newspaper, movies, and others to publicize the same idea. Promoting Japanese propaganda was one of the main objectives of the Kalibapi, but still Japanese failed to gain the trust of the Filipinos. Jose P. Laurel, first president of the Second Republic from 1943 to 1975. Dr. Laurel was born in Tanawan, Batangas on March 9, 1891. His parents were Soterel and Jacoba Garcia. Sotero Laurel was appointed as Undersecretary of the Interior in President Aguinaldo's revolutionary government and designer of Malolos Constitution. Dr. Laurel was finished 7 elementary education in Tanawan, Batangas, and high school in Manila. He finished in Law College of Law of the University of the Philippines. College of the University of the Philippines. 1915 as salutatorian of his class. He is one of the top-notch. When he took a bar exam, he obtained his degree of Masters of Law in 1918 from the Escuela de Teo, and in the same year as a government pension to Yale University, where he acquired the degree of Doctor of Civil Law in 1920. For more knowledge, he took up humanities in the University of Santo Tomas, where he obtained in 1936 the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. After 2 years, Tokyo Imperial University conferred on him the degree of Doctor's Laws. Dr. Laurel's career in government service started as a part-time laborer in the Bureau of Forestry and was promoted to clerk in the Code Committee. 1918, he became the head of the legal division of the Executive Bureau. In 1922, he was appointed chief of the Executive Bureau under the Secretary of the Interior, Teodoro M. Calao, and was promoted under Secretary of the Interior and 10 months later, a full secretary at the age of 32. During the election 1925, he won the senatorial seat for the 5th Senatorial District. Because of his parliamentary ability, he was made a majority floor leader in Senate until 1931, when he lost his re-election bid to another Batanggenyo, Claro M. Recto, who became his good friend and compare until his death. When he retired from politics, he devoted his time to law, practice, teaching, and writing. He taught in various schools in Manila, many of whom became prominent in jurisprudence and politics. He also gave lectures in the University of Santo Tomas, Manila University, Far Eastern University. He was elected as delegate to Constitutional Convention in 1934, where he took a leading role in the making of the Constitution of the Philippines. President Quezon appointed Laurel as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court on November 15, 1935. When the World War II came the Philippines on December 8, 1941, Quezon told Laurel to take care of the people and to be with his people during the agonies of the Japanese, but he has to do it as President Quezon ordered him. He was elected by the National Assembly as President of the Republic on September 25, 1943. This unicameral assembly was created through the sponsorship of the Japanese authorities. During the Japanese, he was compelled to accept this position for the sake of his people who were then suffering beneath the yoke of a brutal rule of the conquerors. He was inducted into the office during inauguration of the Second Republic on October 14, 1943. He saved many people from being arrested, tortured, and executing by without Dr. Laurel intercession. General Rojas would have been executed like Justice Abad Santos. Prelude to liberation, President Laurel, pressured by the Japanese government to declare war against the United States and Great Britain, but he bravely refused to do so. But the first American air raid on Manila in the morning of September 21, 1944, intensified the demand for a Philippine declaration of war. After consulting Rojas and both Cabinet and Council of State, he issued a proclamation declaring the state of war against the U.S. and Great Britain. But even if he were to killed by the Japanese, would never sacrifice the able-bodied Filipinos for Japan. On June 16, 1943, Premier Hideki Toho promised independence to the Philippines. The Kaliba-P would then form the Preparatory Committee on the Philippine Independence, which was tasked with drafting a new constitution. The new constitution was approved by the Preparatory Committee on Philippine Independence on September 4, 1943, and ratified by the Kaliba-P on September 7, 1943. The Kaliba-P then proceeded to elect part of the National Assembly, which also included appointed members. In turn, the National Assembly elected its Speaker and then elected Jose P. Laurel as President. On October 14, 1943, in ceremonies in front of the Legislative Building in Manila, the new republic was inaugurated, and Jose P. Laurel, the chairman of the Preparatory Committee, assumed office as President. On September 21, 1944, President Laurel proclaimed martial law in the Philippines. It came into effect on September 22. On September 23, 1944, Laurel proclaimed that the Philippines was in state of war with the Allied powers, but this never ratified by the National Assembly. In large part, Japanese disappointment with Laurel led to the republic under Laurel being superseded by the Makapili, organized in December 1944 to more militantly oppose the returning American forces and Filipino guerrillas. The Japanese brought the Laurel government to Baguio in December 1944, and a small remnant of the government was taken to Tokyo in March 1945. Laurel formally dissolved the Second Republic on August 17, 1945, 2 days after Japan surrendered to the Allies. When the Commonwealth government was restored on Philippine soil on October 23, 1944, Field Marshal Douglas MacArthur, as military commander, had issued a proclamation nullifying all acts of the Philippine Executive Commission and the Second Republic. The Supreme Court of the Philippines reiterated this nullification in a decision on September 17, 1945, and subsequent decisions, but pointed out President Osmeña recognized the validity of some judicial acts of a non-political nature. The Supreme Court categorized the Philippine Executive Commission and the Second Republic as a de facto, actual, whether by right or not, government in contrast to the jure, meaning rightful or legitimate, status of the Commonwealth government. While this means no laws or regulations from the Second Republic are legally recognized, President Laurel has been included in the roster of Philippine presidents since the 1960s. Many officials who serve in the Philippine Executive Commission, the Second Republic and its various agencies were charged with treason but received an amnesty from President Manuel Rojas on January 28, 1948.